Okay, so we're live now. We're recording. All right, so again, today we're starting the symposium. We still have a few loose ends to tie up for the apology, but I want to talk at the outset a little bit about the structure of the dialogue. So ostensibly, this is a dialogue about love, or eros, the Greek word eros, so erotic love. So it's not like brotherly love or love of a friend or love of a country, or those all have different words in Greek. But when we talk about eros, it's the romantic, it's the desire, the erotic love. So there are a series of speeches. All these different characters are sitting around at a party, and they're all having a discussion about eros. They all have to give speeches in praise of love. The first speech is Phaedrus. Let me spell all this stuff out. So Phaedrus' speech is first, and then after that you get Pausanias. And after Pausanias, geez, I don't know if I can spell this. I'm gonna try. Eryximachus. No, that's not it. Sorry, I gotta cheat. I think I got an extra X when I don't need it. Eryximachus. There we go. All right. Eryximachus is next, and then after that you get oh sorry, yeah, somebody else is here. Aristophanes. And after Aristophanes, you get Agathon. And last but not least is Socrates. He's the grand finale. So we'll talk about each of these, in more detail. I'll give you a little preview. Not much, but a little bit of a preview today once we finish the apology. But for next class, for next meeting, try to read the first three speeches. Okay, so that's if you have this textbook, this version. That would be. Let me look at the page numbers. So today we're going to get through the introductory. We might even get started on Phaedrus. We'll see how we do for time. But for sure, you want to read page 9 all the way to, where does Aristophanes start? 24, 9 to 24. So have that, and it never hurts to read ahead. It never hurts to be ahead on the reading. Okay? So that's the game plan for next class. Somebody put a question in the chat box. I answered that about the paper. Anybody else got any other questions? No? All right, cool. Let's get back to the apology. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just to sort of wrap things up, here we go. What, I sort of mapped this out already, and if you've read the paper topics, you probably already sort of have the answers to this, but and don't feel limited by that. But what do you think the takeaway, what is the moral of the story? What are the major themes of the apology? I have two in my mind that I think are essential to this work, but maybe there are more. There's definitely a lot that other people have focused on as well. But I tend to look at this dialogue, and this is not the only way to do it, in two parts. So if you remember, the first half of the dialogue is essentially, and I hate to call it a dialogue because it's really, Socrates does most of the talking. There's a little bit of back and forth with Meletus, but it's mainly just his defense. And so the first half is the defense. It's him explaining why he's there and where he's coming from, and why he's innocent of the charges, or at least if he does anything wrong, he does it innocently. And the second half is after he's already been charged and he already knows pretty much that his fate is sealed. And I think if we look at the dialogue split up into those two sections, each one of those has its own sort of moral. So if you were trying to explain to one of your friends what the apology was about, I guess you could explain it superficially. And you could just say, well, it's just about Socrates. He was this Greek philosopher and he was being accused of these charges and it's his trial. That's what it's about. That's the plot. But what's the philosophy of the apology though? What is the message that we're supposed to take away, do you think, from the apology or messages? Anybody have any ideas? I think the first half of the dialogue has its own message, and the second half might have a different message. And what I mean by the first half, especially when you think about his the account that he gives of his investigations, how he went to seek knowledge and wisdom from everybody who was thought to be wise, and then he finds out that maybe they're not so wise. What
Would
do
it
you think the lesson of that story is? How do we apply that, like, to our own lives, or can we, to our own way
would
of?
it be the fact that that knowing that you might not know the truth is more important than pretending that you know it?
Good, right. So I use the word humility, although that tends to confuse some of my students because I think it sounds too much, and it's related to the word humiliation. But humility is a good thing. Like it's bad if you lack humility. So those he questioned pretended to have knowledge, or actually thought they had knowledge because of their arrogance, right? Because the poets were so good with their poems and the craftsmen were so good with their craft, they got these big egos and they assumed they knew things they didn't know. But Socrates had the advantage that he was aware of his ignorance, and it's better to be aware of your ignorance than to be, have this pretense for knowledge. And I think that this is definitely something that's useful. I think we all could learn from this, students and teachers alike. Um, I know that when I was a student, sometimes I would be, believe it or not, I'm sort of like talkative, never shut up. But like as a student, I actually was pretty reserved and quiet, and I would never really talk unless nobody else had anything to say. I kind of wait till everybody else, and then I might jump in just to help the teacher out because I was feeling bad for the teacher. But a lot of times I'd be sitting in class thinking about, the teacher would be asking a question, the professor, and I was like, I thought I knew the answer, but I didn't want to say it because I was like, nah, that can't be the answer. That's just too obvious. Or, I don't want to sound stupid, right? I was worried about sounding stupid. So I just shut up. And a lot of times the professor would say the answer and I'd be like, oh, dang, that was what I was going to say. Like, I should have just said something, right? I would have looked all smart. And that's a horrible way to approach it, I think. The Socrates is saying, stupid Travis, like, who cares, say what you think the answer is. Give your response. Have humility. Don't worry about what people will think about you. If you're wrong, the professor will correct you and lead you towards truth. Remember when Socrates was questioning these people and he found out that they were wrong and they had the wrong answers, he tried to correct them and he thought he was doing them a service. He'd want them to do that to him, but of course they didn't like that. That bruised their ego. And so um, there's a saying, an old Buddhist saying, that when the teacher is ready, sorry, when the student is ready, a teacher appears. And what that is usually understood to mean is that, if the student's ready, then it doesn't matter, right? They'll learn something, right? If you're ready for wisdom, if you have the right outlook and the yearning for knowledge and the humility to learn, you're going to learn something. But if you're not ready to learn, if you're stubborn, if you sign up for a class and you're like, screw this class, I don't need to learn this stuff, it's not a part of my major, I'm just going to like do the bare minimum. Even if you have the most amazing professor, you're not going to learn anything from that experience. You have to be open to this. So I think as students, this is useful advice. So some commentators are questioning Socrates' sincerity here. They say he's not really as humble as he acts. He's actually kind of arrogant himself. But even if that's the case, that I think it's still a good point. It's still a good argument. I think it's not just a lesson for students, also teachers. I've had some pretty arrogant teachers in my day. I remember I was taking this anthropology class as an undergraduate, and it really kind of broke my heart when this happened because I really liked this professor. and he was talking about, it was this class, it was anthropology, so we were talking about propaganda and how propaganda was used throughout history to brainwash masses and get them to do some pretty horrible stuff. And so he was going over the Nazis, and he was talking about how Nazi propaganda used classical music from this German composer Richard Wagner, and I said, yeah, also they were inspired by some of the philosophy of Nietzsche, and he said something like, no, they weren't. He's like, he has no, Nietzsche's too rational for the Nazi, or I was like, well, for first off, Nietzsche was sort of a critic of reason, and but this guy was insistent that the Nazis were not influenced by Nietzsche, despite I knew they were. Like I know like Nietzsche would have hated the Nazis. We're actually going to cover Nietzsche later this semester. We'll talk about that in more depth. I think he would have hated them, but they were certainly influenced by him, probably wrongly so. And it's not that it's a pretty well known fact. I mean, Hitler bought a complete set of Nietzsche's works and gave it as a present to Mussolini. So, when this professor was just being a dick and like, no, you're full of it. You don't know what you're talking about. Just shut up. I was just like, it made me lose sort of respect for this guy because I knew he was wrong and he wouldn't let it go. And I wasn't going to fight him because he's a professor. I'm one student. Everybody else is looking at me like, who's this? He doesn't know that I was a philosophy major, that I studied this stuff. This is one of my areas of interest. But I think it's sort of that your teachers, like a lot of your professors, they don't want to look like they don't know something. They don't want to look like the student might know something that they don't know. Or yeah, go ahead.
Or could it be because they just want to preserve that hierarchy?
That might be it too, right? It's sort of like I'm this level. You're not the one here to inform the class. How dare you step into my? That might be it too, right? I don't pretend to know the guy's intentions, but yeah, it might be that too. But to me, it's like I know that there are things I don't know about philosophy. It's a broad subject. I've got my area of specialization, and I'm thinking if a student asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to, I wouldn't say I did, and I wouldn't be so, insistent about it, right? Like I'm sure there might be sometime this semester that you guys ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, right? Like you might, what is Plato's view of this? I'm like, I don't actually know that. It's a good question, but never just make something up. And so I think, again, humility, it goes both ways. It's not just the student has to be humble, the student has to be open to learning, but, I find that it's not that I'm completely against the notion of a hierarchy. You have to respect, people who have come before you. You have to respect their experience. You have to respect their, their knowledge of the subject might have more depth. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But I find that I can learn something from just about anybody, no matter like how little or how much they know about everyone's had their own experience. And I find every semester that at least once or twice a semester, one of my students will ask me a question that makes me think about something differently, or they might have an example from their life that makes me think of a particular topic in a way that I'd never thought of before. And so I think that as a teacher, you have to realize, and this is what I like about Socrates, he might not live up to this, but I think he kind of did. This is one thing I think that even the haters got to kind of acknowledge. He would talk to anybody. He wasn't, he did seem to be a bit of a chauvinist when it came to Athens. He thought Athens was the bomb and that Greek culture was like awesome. But he was curious when a foreigner came to visit. He wanted to hear about their ways. He wanted to hear about their, what they had to say about bravery and justice and all that. And so he was not, he was one to sort of just like ignore traditional titles and pedigree. And if there was somebody who had something interesting to say that might be leading him towards a fuller understanding of truth, then he was open ears. And I think that again also would take a bit of humility. What else do you think, though? So I think I've said enough about the first theme. What is the second major theme, do you think, of this dialogue, or whatever you want to call it, this writing? I mean, I think I'm kind of giving it away with the quote here. If you're looking at the screen, I guess we sort of ended class pretty close to this section where Socrates says that the unexamined life is not worth living. How would you sum that up in a word or a couple words? What is he saying there basically? What is the most important thing? What do you, if you're examining things and you're living an examined life as opposed to an unexamined life, what is this examination aiming for, do you think? What is the goal of this examination?
Would it be a purpose in life, like knowing what you were born to be, and like
Yeah.
questioning those that are above you, and like questioning their ideas and like the way of living and stuff?
I don't know if it's super clear that that's what he's saying. I like that answer better though, and maybe you could pull that out of what he's saying, but I think that's closer to something that Aristotle would probably say, is that like your aim in examining all this stuff about your world and about you is that so you can find your purpose within it. But it seems like Socrates has already found his purpose. His purpose is to go around questioning people, but what is he seeking? What is he looking for? What
He's
is he?
looking for truth. It
Yeah.
seems like he's looking for truth, and he feels
Right.
like if I can't go out and search for the truth, then life isn't worth living.
Yeah. I think you're right. Looking for the truth, and then when he finds it or he knows something that's true or he thinks is true, standing for it, even if it kills him, right? So you have to, I don't know how to put this, you have to seek and uphold the truth. And that's even more important than your own life.
Yeah, and it was like as if the book was titled Apology, because he was like, I apologize for being me, but I'm gonna be me regardless, and I apologize for that.
Well, I like that reading, but I think we covered this a few classes. You might not have been here, but the title apology, it comes from the Greek word apologia, which just means legal defense. So the translation is not a very good translation, because you're right. He's not really apologizing, right? But maybe I like that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I gotta be me, but I gotta be me, and even if it's annoying, it's the right thing to do. And I know you're gonna swat me like a fly, and kill me, but I'm doing the right thing, because it's more important to live a good life, which seeks the truth, than to live a long life, even if that's the price you have to pay, is to be persecuted and executed, and etc. I always admired Socrates, but I gotta say, I think he's a little bit more, he's more convincing to me when it comes to the first of the two themes than the second one. I kind of admire his tenacity and his standing up for truth, but I also like being alive a whole lot. So I don't know if, I'm not quite sure I could be as heroic as he is in the face of death. Maybe if I was in my 70s like he was, and I felt like I'd had a long life and was getting old or something. I don't know. So I think he 72 or something like this, and that's pretty old for back then. So I don't know, but this is sort of the takeaway, I guess. And again, there might be more themes, probably are way more things that you can pull from this. I think rather rich writing of Plato. But to me, that's those are sort of the main morals of the story, right? What makes Socrates special is his ability to acknowledge his ignorance and to have this humility, unlike his contemporaries who let their arrogance get the best of them, and that he's willing to do whatever it takes to uncover wisdom, to uncover truth, even if it gets him into trouble, even if it gets him persecuted. For him, those are unnecessary things to worry about. Those are not his concern. And you're going to see when we get to the symposium and the sort of introduction, although I don't think it's quite as dramatic, there are ways that Socrates' character comes across in the opening passages of the Symposium, which I think quite fit in quite well with his behavior that we've seen so far, what he's said and what he's done. But let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and I've got a comment here that I missed. So for some reason the chat box it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and so sometimes I don't see it until I stop sharing the screen. And so it looks like a lot of you are trying to answer the question, searching for the truth, before somebody chimed in. Let's see, but this last comment's a little different. Does that make sense? There is no absolute truth, but one can argue that when you find the purpose of something, you can find the truth of something, which is the purpose, true purpose. I don't know. Again, is truth and purposefulness the same thing? I'm not sure that they are. I think that they're quite different to me. For instance, you could have your whole life based on something that is false and still get purpose out of it, I guess. Now, to be fair to your comment, Jacob, I think maybe Plato might see it that way. Plato might, if we step back and get a fuller view of his philosophy, that Plato as a philosopher might think that being truthful and seeking truth is exactly what your purpose is. But the way he defines seeking truth is a little bit more broader than I think than what we probably have in mind. When we think of that phrase, for him, seeking truth might be like just being a good slave, right? Or being a good citizen or something like that. So not exactly what we would think of as truthful. In fact, he talks about certain lies that lead you to truth. Like the people in charge of the republic, the wise philosopher kings can tell lies to those who aren't quite as wise, so that it'll lead them towards the true way to be, of being good and all this stuff. So, but there's this very metaphysical underpinning behind that belief of equating truth with goodness, with reason, with purposefulness, and that's a controversial view, I think. But we will come back to that. So hold your thoughts. But we'll come back to that probably not till we get to the end of this book here, though, the Symposium, because once we get to the end and we get to Socrates' speech, even though, again, this is about love, apparently, it gets really hardcore metaphysical. We start talking about love and beauty in very abstract, universalistic terms. But it sort of starts, with the early speeches. It kind of starts just sort of at the ground level, the kind of eros, the kind of love or passion that we're familiar with. And then again, when we get to Socrates and his speech, you start to see more of this metaphysical approach. Let's look again at the structure of the Symposium. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so these are the speeches. I'm going to have you, and someone was asking about the first essay at the beginning of class. If you want to write on the Symposium, if you want to write your first essay about the Symposium, the topic is just going to be over the first 5 of the speeches. And so we'll probably be done with those by Monday, a week from today. So next class we'll do the first 3, and then on Monday we'll do Aristophanes and Agathon. But those 5 speeches, you're going to pick one of those, anyone you like, and then you're going to provide a critique. You can either defend it. I like this speech. I think it's a good speech in praise of love and etc. And kind of defend it, or you can attack it, which to me usually is a little easier. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm such a critic. I've got such a critical, skeptical mind. But that's basically the assignment. Today we're probably not going to have time to get into any of the speeches. We might. We'll see. I want to talk about the introductory section, the opening of the Symposium. And it's interesting the way that it's framed. So let me separate all these names here at the bottom. So these are the speeches, but there are a couple characters in the dialogue who are not a part of the Symposium. First off, who knows what is that word, the title of this dialogue? And this is more properly a dialogue.
Having a drink together.
Good. Yeah, it literally means drinking together. Like that's the literal translation. But yeah, it's a gathering usually where men would hang out and get drunk and have discussions, like philosophical discussions. And we hear about this particular symposium where all of these men, Phaedrus, Pausanias, Anaximachus, Aristophanes, Agathon, Socrates, all these men were gathered, and they were drinking together, as you say. And Apollodorus heard about this story. He heard about this story from a friend of his who was actually there, Aristodemus. And I'm not really sure who these guys were, and nobody really does. They might have been made up by Plato. Apollodorus, I don't know. Does that have something to do with Apollo, the god of truth and sun or whatever? But it starts off, you got this guy Apollodorus who knew Aristodemus, and Aristodemus was there. He was at this event, and so he's able to recount it. And Aristodemus told Apollodorus, and Apollodorus is telling it to somebody who we don't know. It's this unnamed, I think in our translation it just says the friend, right? The person who shall not be named. I almost think that Plato did it that way because we're supposed to be that person, right? The reader is supposed to be the friend. You know, we're the ones going up to Apollodorus. But apparently this person is a businessman, right? He's apparently somebody who makes a lot of money. Or at least that's what he's worried about. His main concern is money. Why do I say this? Well, on page 2, if you got the book, it's page 2. If you found a different version online, you want to look for the margin numbers, and you want to look for 173C. This guy, the stranger, the friend, whoever it is that's talking to Apollodorus, he says, tell me the story. You speak and I'll listen. As we walk the city, this is the perfect opportunity. So that is what we talked about on our way. And that's why, as I said before, I'm not unprepared. Well, if I'm to tell you about it too, I'll be glad to. After all, my greatest pleasure comes from philosophical conversation, even if I'm only a listener, whether or not I think it will be to my advantage. All other talk, especially the talk of rich businessmen like you, bores me to tears. And I'm sorry for you and your friends because you think your affairs are important when really they're totally trivial. Perhaps in your turn you think I'm a failure. And believe me, I think what you think is true. But as for all of you, I don't just think you're failures, I know it for a fact. So really condescending tone here. But kind of clever in a way. Why is he what's he saying here? He says that I'm happy to talk to you about philosophy. You know, I'm so happy that you asked about this symposium because I love discussing philosophy. Unlike what you guys discuss, which is what the talk of rich businessmen, that bores him to tears. Because he says that those affairs are trivial. They're totally trivial, right? So the making money and all that, getting rich, that's not important. Pursuing philosophy. This ties back into to Socrates' asceticism. Remember that term, asceticism, we went over last time? A life that is detached from physical and sensual pleasures, the pleasures of the world, and focused on spiritual and intellectual goods. So this guy Apollodorus is certainly of this type, right? He's following in Socrates' footsteps when he says, I don't care about all that rich businessman talk. It's trivial. Perhaps in your turn, you think I'm a failure. And believe me, I think that what you say is true. So they think he's a failure, and he agrees. Why do you think he says that? Why does he so they think he's a failure, and he agrees, yeah, I am a failure. Probably not for the reasons they think he's a failure, I'm guessing. I got to stop sharing for some reason because, again, I can't see the chat.
Oh, I was typing this down.
Okay. So I'm guessing that they think he's a failure. They think this guy's a failure because he's not a rich businessman, right? But he thinks they're failures. Why? Actually, he knows they're failures, he says. Doesn't just think it, he knows they're failures. Why? Why are they failures? He thinks I'm assuming he thinks he's a failure for the same reason that Socrates thought he was a failure when he heard that he was the wisest. He's like, I can't be the wisest. I don't know anything. And, you know, I'm really humble. And so I'm assuming that Apollodorus is kind of similar, right? Like, well, you're right. I am a failure. Not for the reasons you think. You think I'm a failure because I'm not rich and don't have all these, you know, all this gold and stuff stored away like some miser. That's why you think I'm a failure. But I am a failure. You're right. Because I'm not wise. There's many things I wish I was wiser at. That I wish I knew I was a better philosopher. But I know you guys are failures. Right? I know you're a failure. Right? Why? Because they just care about money. That's all they care about. Making money. And the friend's like, you're never going to change. You're always nagging. Come on, just tell me this freaking story, right? He says, all right. Well, this is on line 174A. The speeches went something like this, but I'd better tell you the whole story from the very beginning as Aristodemus told me. And I misspelled Aristodemus, and it's going to annoy me, so let me correct that real quick. It's a U. Same thing. Oh, I got that one right. Apollodorus. All right. So he said that on one day he ran into Socrates, who had just bathed and put on his fancy sandals. Both very unusual events. Right? Again, like, why is he telling us this? He just bathed and put on fancy sandals. Both unusual events. So Socrates is a smelly, stinky bum, right? Like, what? Again, I think it having to do with his asceticism. Not only does he not care about money and wealth, that's not what is important to living a good life for Socrates, but he doesn't really care about personal hygiene or fancy clothes. But why is he getting all dressed up? Because he's been invited to this party, right? And who is holding the party? Why are they holding the party? Who gathered that from the reading? It's at Agathon's. What's the deal? It's a big celebration. Kind of. It's a dinner party, but
I read it, but I'm drawing a blank. I know they partied the previous night.
Yeah, they were really hungover from the night before, so that's why they decided to talk, because they figured they would drink less if they gave speeches, right? And so they wouldn't get so messed up. But yeah, they were celebrating Agathon, who had just won a prize at usually, so Agathon was a playwright. Put that next to his name, right? He wrote tragedies, right? And his tragedy had won a prize at the festival. These festivals were a big deal. They had these yearly festivals, and everyone would go. It was like mandatory. It was almost like election or something. You had to go as a citizen, and it was a duty. And you saw all these different plays, tragedies, and sometimes comedies, and you'd vote. And he won. He won the prize. So they're all excited about this, and Socrates is invited. Now, Aristodemus is not invited, and Socrates tells him he should come anyways, and he's really hesitant. And so we've got this kind of awkward introductory passage where what actually happens on the way to the party to our poor friend Aristodemus between him and Socrates.
He gets left, or Socrates is like leaving him, or not leaving him. He's too far behind. He
Right,
gets left.
yeah, why does he do that? What's the deal? So Socrates keeps pausing, and like Aristodemus will realize that he's like 20 yards behind him. Like, why is he stopping? What's the... Like, what is he doing, do you
That-
think? How's he being characterized here?
He's like contemplating things
Right,
that are
right.
totally like on a different plane.
Right, exactly. So he's like lost in these deep philosophical thoughts, right? Again, I think this is another characterization of him as the ascetic, you know, detached from, I don't care about the dinner party and the drinking and the festivities. I'm contemplating the depth of everything around me, and so lost in, you know, this sort of absent-minded philosopher. And it gets really weird when the guy shows up, because he gets there early, and Socrates is way behind, and so he's like, "Hey, I know I wasn't invited, but luckily it kind of works out, because they're like, hey, I was going to invite you. I didn't see you yesterday. I'm glad you came. Where's Socrates?" And he's still, like, I think he's like in the neighbor's porch looking at the wind chimes or something like that. And, you know, they basically say, hey, just leave him alone, right? Agathon's like, go fetch him to one of the slaves. Like, just leave the guy alone. You know, he does that sometimes. He'll catch up to us. But again, you know, this is a character. I would call it character development. You know, Plato is trying to give you some idea of the kind of man that Socrates is. This comes up again, I think, throughout the dialogue, especially towards the end. And we're going to skip the last part. So, I mean, I'd recommend reading it for fun. But the last section where, you know, all the drunken revelers show up at the end and kind of crash the party, you know, and one of them has a crush on Socrates. It's kind of fun. We're going to skip over that part. But in that section, you hear a little bit more about Socrates and when he was in battle, how he was out in the freezing cold and it didn't even feel like he was moved at all by the conditions that he was in. And he was drinking alcohol all night and didn't get drunk. And so, because he's just so detached from the physical, so detached from his body and focused on his intellect. But yeah, as you said, Shelly, they're all like, they'd celebrated the night before. They were all like really kind of hungover. So they decided, you know what? We're going to go ahead and we're going to like let the flute girls go away. All the little flute girls with their fans and their yeah, I don't know, whatever else they offer to these men, right? We don't want their distractions. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to give speeches. And they make this observation, which is kind of odd to me. I guess I don't know. I'm no expert on Greek literature. I'm a fan of it. I like to read Greek poetry and stuff, but I'm not an expert. I don't have like a doctorate in Greek literature. But I found this passage quite confusing when they say that not enough poems have been written in praise of love. And maybe that's true, I guess. You know, they're thinking about the Greek poets like Homer and Pindar and, you know, Hesiod. And so, and they're also thinking about love in terms of the Greek gods. And so you have all these poems that honor the gods like Zeus and Hera and Apollo and Poseidon and Hades and all these, but there's not a lot of poetry written about Eros, or what we would call maybe, you know, through the Roman influence, Cupid, you know, the sort of this deity that is seen as compelling us to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, want to get busy with someone else. Like, there's not enough poetry about this. There aren't enough songs in praise of Eros. And so they decide they're going to correct this injustice to love. And each of them, they're all going to give a speech in turn in praise of love, in praise of Eros, right? So the first speech is going to come from Phaedrus. And then there's Pausanias and Eryximachus and Aristophanes. And then finally Agathon. And at the very end, we finally get Socrates' speech, which is quite in-depth and quite a little bit more involved than the other ones. But each of them, I guess, just to sort of give us a feel for the cast of characters, each of them, you could argue, gives a speech that is unique to them and might actually, this is debatable, but actually might relate to the kind of person they are. So for instance, Phaedrus, he's the first speech, he is a rhetorician, okay? Okay. Can anybody guess what a rhetorician is? We went over rhetoric, didn't we? What's rhetoric? Anybody remember?
It is
Some
the
older
art
form of a lawyer.
persuasion.
Well, I know why you would say that, but not exactly. Who else was going to say? Not exactly a lawyer. What's rhetoric?
I would say it's the art of persuasion. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know how else to describe it besides the art of persuasion, but I think y'all get it.
Yeah. Persuasion is a good way to put it. You know, usually it's tied to speech, though, right? But yeah, using speech, using style to persuade, to get a certain result, or to get a certain reaction. And so you could think of Phaedrus as like your speech teacher today. That'd be like a modern day analog, like how to give a good speech. I'm sure some of you have probably taken speech. Like most of you have to take it as a requirement. I know I did, but yeah, so that's kind of like what he does. He's not exactly a sophist, right? The sophists would teach rhetoric, but they taught it with a certain aim in mind, But he taught it just for the sake of teaching it. Phaedrus is just how to be persuasive. Now, Pausanias is kind of the mystery man. No one really quite knows what he does or what his role is in this dialogue, but it's pretty clear that he is Agathon's lover. So I don't know if he's like just one of Agathon's little groupie boys or what, but he's Agathon's lover. And I think that, to me, at least maybe I'm reading into it when we get to his speech, I think I can kind of see maybe why he gives the speech that he gives, seeing as how he's much younger than Agathon. Agathon is a very successful man, and so I think his speech is sort of couched in his defense, right? To sort of, explain why his love with Agathon is real. He's not just some little groupie boy. Now, Symmachus is a physician. All right, so he's going to give this speech, and it's going to be couched in medical terms. And I would say out of all the speeches, his is the most confusing to me. It uses a lot of metaphor and analogy and symbolism, and he really broadens the scope, I think, of what we have in mind when we think of eros or erotic love. Now Aristophanes, like Agathon, he's also a poet, or what we would call him a playwright today. Remember, poets, that was a general term for creative types. Poesis was to create to the ancient Greek. So Aristophanes, just like Agathon, he is a writer, he's a playwright, but he didn't write tragedies, he wrote comedy. And I think this is actually kind of odd, because it seems like Plato has Aristophanes, although you might disagree with me when we get to this part. You might think what are you talking about, Professor Ross? But I think Aristophanes is much more serious, and his love is a little bit more deep than what Agathon gives us. And so it's almost like, I don't know, Aristophanes writes what I would expect Agathon to write, since Agathon's a writer of tragedies, which are more serious. And Agathon writes something a little bit more lighthearted and a little bit more fun and more positive and optimistic, which is what I would expect from a writer of comedy. So it seems like, when it comes to the last two speeches before Socrates, those are the ones that kind of like, they make the least amount of sense to me. But when you get to Aristophanes, the Aristophanes speech is pretty funny. Like he's got this myth about love and where true love comes from and how we all used to be. Well, I won't give it away just yet. We'll wait till we get to it. But I find it quite humorous. It's got a very humorous myth in it. But it's sad, though, at the same time. It's kind of a tragic story of love. Last but not least, we have Socrates, who is, of course, the philosopher. And there's a very popular way of reading this dialogue, and that is to see each of these speeches as progressive, that each speech gets better, and each speech gets closer and closer to the truth, just like the prisoner in the cave from Plato's allegory, getting closer and closer to the sun, and then finally seeing it all, the truth of being and all that is. Some see a similar structure in the Symposium, right? So we start with a very superficial account of Eros. I should write the word Eros up here. So again, we talk about love. Let's keep in mind we're talking about a specific type of love, one that involves sexual attraction, for lack of a better word, right? The sort of that element, the erotic love. But anyway, the idea is that we start with a very superficial account of that from Phaedrus, and then as we progress towards the end and get closer, when we get to Socrates, we get a much more fully worked out and more universalistic and truthful account of love from the philosopher. But I mean, I don't want to feel like we should be tied to that reading. I think that there's some good arguments against it. You know, I for one find it difficult to see, and maybe this is my own bias, because I think my least favorite account is Aristophanes. I think his is entertaining. It's probably the most fun to read. But when you unpack the philosophy behind it and what it's saying about love, I find it the most troubling. I don't like it. I think it's the least, and maybe that's a personal bias. Maybe that's why. So I've always had issues with this progressive interpretation, although I can see why it's appealing. Certainly, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you get to the end that Socrates' speech is supposed to be the best one. It's the grand finale. He's got it right. They've got it just partially right. You know, they got a few things here and there, but otherwise they're completely off their rocker, and Socrates sort of straightens them out. So that's the basic structure of the dialogue. As I said, next class, I want you guys to have read the first 3 of these speeches. We've got about 20 minutes left, and so what I want to do here, 25 minutes, whatever, what I want to do here is we might actually get out a bit early, but let's go ahead and read. Let's go ahead and do the reading, or at least part of the reading. I'm just going to straight up read from the book here at the very beginning of Phaedrus's speech. So Phaedrus starts. In fact, let me get a new slide here. We're going to get a slide for each of the different speeches. So let me get one for Phaedrus. And I'll put in parentheses. Remember, he's the rhetorician. So let's read what he has to say. This is page 9. Love is a great God, wonderful in many ways to gods and men, and most marvelous of all is the way he came into being. We honor him as one of the most ancient gods, and the proof of his great age is this. The parents of love have no place in poetry or legend. According to Hesiod, the first to be born was chaos, but then came earth, broad-chested, a seat for all, forever safe, and love. And Acusilus agrees with Hesiod. After chaos came earth and love, these two. And Parmenides tells of this beginning. The very first god she designed was love. All sides agree then that love is one of the most ancient gods. So the first thing he says is that love is old, basically, right? I don't know. I mean, I know in our culture now, in the East, it's a little, Eastern cultures, it's a little different. But in the West, we tend to praise youth and we tend to scorn old age. So if you're praising love by calling it old, it's not quite obvious, right? But he says it's the most ancient of gods. And therefore, it provides one of the greatest goods. And we'll talk about what that greatest good here is in just a moment. I'll continue reading where I left off. But first off, let's look at it. He's giving us, believe it or not, you might not have caught it because it's pretty subtle. He's giving us an argument for this. How is he arguing? I'm not saying it's a good argument, by the way. But what's his argument for saying that love is the oldest God? He's a great God, wonderful in many ways. We honor him because of his great age. The proof of his great age is this. The parents of love have no place in poetry or legend. According to Hesiod, the first to be born was chaos. And then he quotes Hesiod, who was an ancient, he's like a Greek poet, the epic poet. He quotes from Hesiod, then came earth, broad-chested, a seat for all, forever safe, and love. So Hesiod, if you read Theogony, from the very opening lines, the creation of all the world, first was chaos. That was all chaos. Then came Earth, solid form, a broad-chested, a seat for all, and then love. Right, love came, I guess, and then stuff started blooming and all that. And then he says Acusilus agrees with Hesiod. So Acusilus was a genealogist. After chaos came earth and love, these two. And then Parmenides, who was a philosopher, tells of this beginning. The first God designed was love. So what's his argument? How is he arguing that love is the most ancient? What's the argument here? Why should we believe that love is the oldest God? Based on what evidence, according to Phaedrus? What evidence is he providing?
Because all these other gods say so.
Right, or they're not gods. All the people that write about the gods, like Hesiod and Parmenides, and all the poets, all the ancient poets, and the philosophers, and the genealogists, they all say it, so it must be the case. Now, you think that's a good argument?
Mm-mm.
No, it's horrible. He's committing what you would call it's called the appeal to authority fallacy. A fallacy, I don't know, we covered fallacies yet. A fallacy is just a bad form of reasoning, And so this is known as the appeal to authority fallacy. People thought that Hesiod, he was a great poet, he has authority. People respected Parmenides, he's a wise man, he's a philosopher. People respected Acusilus as this great genealogist. But just because somebody respects someone, just because people have authority, doesn't mean they're right. And so why do they say that love is the most ancient? Were they there at the beginning of time? Did Hesiod see the beginning? Is that how he knows? Right. So yeah, not a really strong argument for his case. But where's he going with this? Why does he say it's the greatest or the oldest? Well, because it's the oldest. I guess because it's the oldest. All the Greeks thought of the more primal forces as the more ancient. There's these primal gods, the Titans, these forces of nature, and all other things are sort of stacked up or built upon that foundation. And so since love is one of those ultimate base primal forces, it must be the bedrock for something really good and really essential to everything else. So what is it? What is this greatest good that Phaedrus is talking about? He says, and I'll repeat that line, all sides agree that love is one of the most ancient gods. As such, he gives to us the greatest goods. I cannot say what greater good there is for a young boy than a gentle lover, or for a lover than for a boy to love. I guess I should have warned you guys beforehand. This is a very a lot of postmodernists talk about heteronormative, like everything's heteronormative. This is actually homonormative. So what does that mean? All the men here seem to talk about male, particularly male homosexuality, not female, no lesbians, but they tend to talk about male homosexuality as superior to other forms of love. Okay, so and we won't have time to talk about that today, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's going to be inevitable when we get to the second speech of Pausanias. But
it's pretty thick in the introduction.
There's good. Thanks for reminding me. So if you're interested in it, you can look at the introduction and read more about it. I don't want to dwell on it too much. I think it's kind of distracting to some of the more deeper points, but just keep that in mind. So what is he talking about here? He says, so the greatest good is for a young boy is to have a lover. Why? Why is it good to have a lover? Well, there's a certain guidance that each person needs for his whole life if he is to live well. And nothing imparts this guidance, not high kinship, not public honor, not wealth. Nothing imparts this guidance as well as love. What guidance do I mean? I mean a sense of shame at acting shamefully, and a sense of pride in acting well. Without these, nothing fine or great can be accomplished in public or in private. So what's he basically saying there? What is so great about love? What does it do to humans in particular, it seems we're talking about here, that's so great? What it provides the greatest good. What is that? What were you gonna say?
It motivates them to be a better person.
Right. So it gives us. Go ahead.
Your life,
Right.
or have someone to look up to, or if you're probably like the beta of the relationship, then you will try to do your best to please the expectations of the alpha.
Right. Right. Yeah. So you want to be the best version of yourself for that other person, right? And you use the term the beta of the relationship. I mean, that's kind of like internet slang, but it's actually kind of appropriate, honestly, because they do talk about this. You're going to see when we get to these different examples, he talks about how there's always in the relationship, there's always the lower, he never uses the word beta, but like, yeah, there's always the one who's like the beloved, and then there's the one who loves the beloved. And so there's this power dynamic, and the one who is, devoting their life to the one they love, as he argues, it inspires them to be a good person, to be moral, to be, it gives them a sense of shame in acting shamefully, a sense of pride in acting well, as he puts it. And he says that when I feel love for someone like that, when I feel this eros, that it's gonna make me have that. I'll be so inspired by it that nothing else will be able to trump it, right? So he mentions high kinship, public honor, wealth. Those are all incentives that people might think about. I'm going to be a good person because, like all these corporations that post like Black Lives Matters on their website while they exploit all their black workers and pay them like slave labor, like, or whatever, right? Like they're just doing it because they have to like look good to the public. Like they want to keep their wealth. They're doing a good thing by supporting a good cause, but like they're just doing it for the wrong reasons, right? But he's arguing that if you're in love with somebody and you feel this love, that's more of a motivator than money, right? That's more of a motivator than kinship. I guess like you want to, have a good name for your family and you don't want to shame your family name. Public honor, you want to be famous or people think you're a good person in public. All those are motivators, but none of them are as powerful, he says, as love to do this. What do you agree? You guys, anybody got any difference of opinion here about what he has to say about love? I'm a bit skeptical myself, I got to say. But how did you put it? You said so. Love. I don't know. Maybe just put a bullet point here. So he says love is the most ancient. That's kind of how he starts. But then he adds, it provides guidance. I guess maybe I should add moral guidance. It gives us a sense of shame or pride. Right? We feel ashamed to do something shameful. We feel pride to do something well. We want our lover to see us doing these things. What do you think? Whenever you fall in love with somebody, it makes you a better person?
It depends.
Yeah, I agree. On what does it depend on, though, you think?
On the other person you're with.
The expectations they put up on you.
Right. So if you fall in love with, like, for example, like what if you fell in love with, trying to think of like a really bad person, but I'm trying to be like politically neutral here. Oh yeah, what if you fall in love with Hitler? Like, is he gonna guide you to be a good person? Ali in the comments says the expectations you hold yourself to for their sake. Yeah. So, but that's the question though is, so I think that there's definitely something to this, that if you are attracted to somebody in that way, if you feel this love for them in that way, you're going to behave a certain way in their presence. But is that behavior always going to be good? And you say it depends on who you fall in love with, or depends on that person. Um,
I
I'm
don't
trying to think.
agree with it at all.
What's that?
I
What's
don't
that?
agree with it.
Right? Yeah, I don't either. Well,
Well,
I think it goes both ways. Like it could, like, yeah, you could meet someone and it could make you a better person, but you could also meet someone and makes you a horrible person, right? But what were you thinking? Do you have any examples?
um,
You don't have to get personal, but like
the
I'm trying to think of examples from like movie or like, you know, from TV that people will know.
oh, I'm thinking about this specific guy. I don't know. I think there's a lot of things that come across my mind when these older men just want somebody to to look up to them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And maybe, and what you're talking about sounds like it's relevant for the next speech too. When we get to talking about that, we'll talk about sort of the way that they had everything. They had things arranged in Greek society where you had these young men basically being. The idea was that these men would be their guides, would sort of be their mentor or whatever, and they basically just took advantage of them. But it sounds like you might be talking about something different, where it's like, you know, older guys might date younger people just to get like an ego boost, sort of like midlife crisis,
Yeah.
sort of guy going out and buying a Corvette so he feels like he's younger or something, you know, try to recapture his lost youth. Ronnie mentions in the comments abusive relationships, and yeah, of course, right. Like says, you know, you drink at night, they blame you for always drinking. Then the party they expect you to drink it can be stressing. Yeah, I know. I have a friend who's a horrible alcoholic, and he's I wish he would stop drinking, and the girl he's with wants him to stop drinking, but then she drinks like crazy in front of him. Like they go see concerts, and she like guzzles beer all night, and it's like, dude, you should not date an alcoholic if you're gonna drink like that right in front of their face. Like I mean, I get it. Like if you're at a party or a family, you know, they got to deal with it. They can't be the buzzkill. But yeah, so yeah, I can see how, you know, people can be that way, right? They can sort of, they can be good influences, they can be bad influences. I've got a bunch of things in the comments now. Gypsy Rose. I'm not familiar with Gypsy Rose. That
No,
could
it's
be an example.
terrible.
Tell me, educate me. Who is this Gypsy Rose? She fell in love with a guy with mental problems. He ended up nap killing her mother just because she asked him to. Oh, wow. Yeah. You hear stories about that. I need to look that one up after class today. I need to Google that
It's
one.
on Hulu. You can watch it. There's like a show about it. It's
Like a
really
documentary. Yeah.
After the documentary, if you do watch it, look up the interrogation video.
Oh, the interrogation, yeah. No, I remember seeing some news story. Maybe this is the same one, but there was this lady who basically was sleeping with a guy who happened to be an undercover cop or something. Or I forgot how it happened, but basically she wanted to kill her husband and murder her husband for like all this money. And she was cheating on him with all these dudes and kept trying to get all these dudes to kill her husband for her. And then finally one of them just turned her in. And then this undercover cop went and slept with her, or, you know, tried to get her and recorded her saying all this stuff, and basically, you know, got her to confess. And yeah, I mean, she was basically getting all these men to. None of them did it though, thank goodness. But I mean, imagine one of them did. You know, she basically, yeah, Bonnie and Clyde. I like that. Ollie Khan, yeah. Yeah, I haven't watched that movie in forever, but there's been like, for some reason, a renewed interest in Bonnie and Clyde. But yeah, exactly. Like sometimes love can inspire you to be a really good person if you're in love with a really good person. But yeah, if you fall in love with a manipulator, I don't know if this is really the case. In fact, love could probably be the worst thing for you, especially if what he says is right, that it has more influence on you than wealth, kinship, public honor. I think that's more of an individual thing too. I think some people care more about wealth than they care about love or anything else. Some people care more about being popular than love. Some people, you know, so I don't know. But I guess if you feel like if you're shot by Cupid's arrow, then you know, you're like a slave to that person that you're in love with, the first person you see. I've got a
Or
couple
it,
things in the, yeah, somebody who's going to jump in.
yeah, it could also depend on the person, like on the individual. Because if you let yourself be manipulated by someone else, then that's like on you.
Right.
And like if you want to, like if you have a strong character, you're not gonna let anybody else tell you what to do, or like you're not gonna let
Right.
people else, I guess, like manipulate you.
Yeah, and I think that, and I think though, if that's the case, I would argue, and I tend to agree with you, but I would argue that if you were that kind of person, then you probably wouldn't fall in love with somebody like that to begin with. You know, like, or if you did, you'd soon realize that you were mistaken, and you would fall out of love with them pretty quick. Anyway, I got some stuff in the comments here I want to read first before I wrap up class. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, Ali mentioned how Bonnie was actually the more dominant of the pair. She actually manipulated Clyde to do a bunch of stuff. Yeah, I think he had actual mental issues, much more so than she did, and he had like a lower IQ, and she was able to like, yeah. I don't want to put the. I think what I forgot who was just talking, but the young lady who was just talking, I think she. We don't want to completely like exonerate both party or one party though. You know, you should have your own agency or responsibility. But let's see what Ronnie says. Usually people with toxic persona, mostly narcissistic, gaslighting, never win. Yeah, I think Ronnie's just sort of adding to what's already been said, right? That it depends on the person that you love, depends on uh, you yourself and your own sort of self confidence. Um, let's see. Sometimes it's a friend or family that can cut off completely, so most people can't really leave. Yeah, well, when you mention about, okay, when we're talking about love here, we're talking about specifically not familial love. I think that's not love between like a brother and mother, but like you're raising a good point that sometimes you'll have these connections with the family. If you have an abusive family, that love might blind you and let you and allow you to take things you shouldn't take, or do things you shouldn't do, or something like that. Um, oh, by family, you mean wife or husband? Yeah, sure. Well, then that would definitely count. Um, Lisa says, could love be an overwhelming feeling? Um, yeah. So yeah, not to please the lover at all costs. Yeah. So I think the idea is though that feeling, the argument that I think Phaedrus is making is that yes, love is that feeling. It is this overwhelming feeling of desire for somebody else. You want to be with them, sexually, however you want to put it. But that desire is what inspires you to do all these things, right? That inspires you to please them, to be lovable, to be something worthy of their love. I guess you think they're so great that you want to be up to their level, so you improve your behavior to sort of meet their level. But again, I'm with a lot of you, a lot of great comments. I think this is kind of naive. Like you're assuming they're going to love somebody that's worthy of loving. You're going to assume that they're always going to love somebody good, and all this. Anyway, so anybody else have anything else they wanted to add? We got like 3 minutes to go for class. Oh, now you're bringing in biology. We'll get to biology later. Ollie's got a good comment about the chemical reaction in your brain, right? The increased levels of dopamine, the kind of the love buzz, all that sort of stuff. And actually, I think that will be there's a couple of comments that Agathon makes that I think would sort of they suggest that sort of, oh, love is something that just hits you really hard and then it goes really quick. So that sort of dopamine rush, they didn't know about dopamine back then. They didn't know about hormones and stuff, but there's certainly parallels there. But anyways, we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to stop recording.